Welcome to the 63rd episode of the Patio Pondering Podcast. My guest today is Justin Fix, joining me from Muscatine, Iowa. Justin, before we get into anything else, I'd like you to start at the beginning. Can you walk us through your roots in Southeast Iowa, your path through school, and how you found your way back there?
For sure. First, I appreciate you having me on. I know our paths haven't directly crossed a bunch, but have a lot of common interactions. And one of my former employees, she's still part of our company, but used to report to me, now has switched to Amanda Minton, has been on here. So I look forward to the conversation. So just in terms of me, try to be quick about it. But as you mentioned, I'm born and raised in Muscatine, Iowa. I would say if you look at the side of Iowa, there's a nose shape to it, and we'd be right where some of that fluid might come out of the nose if you sneezed. It's also one of the few places where the Mississippi is actually south of my house. People don't often think about that because the river runs east and west there. But grew up, for at least the first couple of years, I was brought back from the hospital to a trailer on my family century farm. My mom and dad divorced before I remember them even being together, so I was quite young. It's been amicable. I mean, nothing from there, but just from the standpoint of how I was raised, mostly it was in the 80s. So it's, every other weekend visitation thing, which blows my mind still, but that's just common at that point. So mostly raised in town. And go out to my dad's. He lived on the back 40, truly the back 40. Yeah. Put a house there, or they had a house there that was on the back 40 of my grandparents, 160 acres that were on the front side. And so go out there, would spend a lot of time with my grandparents as well as my dad on the weekends. Kind of my initial exposure to agriculture. My dad remarried to a woman whose family farmed quite a bit more. So my dad, coming back in the 80s, wasn't a great time to expand into farming. So, they had 50, 60 cows, maybe 50, 60 acres of hay and corn, soybeans. They'd kind of rotate through that process, but nothing major. In fact, my dad and grandpa both drove school bus. You can still see the school bus that would park there, at the farm. And then my dad ultimately went and worked for Han Industries. So a lot of you are probably sitting in a Han Industries or HNI all-steel chair right now, or at a desk. So worked for there, a couple of their GPC actually for a while, and then as well, the state while farming on the side. So I'll give you that background, but my stepmom at the time, or stepmom for a long part of my life, her family was very involved in purebred cattle. Braunbay, one of the original importers of Braunbay. I can give you the history of that if you'd like, but also some Simmentals and different things. And so they showed at Denver, Houston, a lot of those big ones, and I kind of got exposed to that. We showed a little bit, nothing major by any means, very heavily involved in FFA. And that's where I met the late Mr. Dave Fowler, who was a big part of my influence in kind of livestock judging through that. And, ultimately went over to Lakeland in Illinois to judge on a scholarship there. Came back to Iowa State to judge as well. And that's what got me into what I'm doing today. At that time, my judging coach was a guy by the name of Clint Schwab, who has since then been my boss for 10 of my 15 years. This past year, I kind of moved out from underneath him for the first time in a while. Now we have different titles, but we report to the same person. So I've that's what got me exposed to genetics. Worked with him, Tom Boz, the late Ken Stalder. Kind of got exposed into I knew what EPDs and indexes were just from judging, but didn't really understand it. That's where I always wanted to do graduate school. Nothing more than I called it a phased program of growing up. Graduate school didn't make me grow up quite as fast. And so that was exciting. And ultimately decided swine genetics was the field I wanted to go to. They connected me with Dr. Todd C. down in North Carolina State, as well as Steve Moeller at Ohio State. It was weather a bit like today. My flight was delayed. It was cold and snowy in Ohio, and it was 65 and 70 in North Carolina. I was like, this seems like the place I'd like to spend 4 or 5 years. So I went down there, interacted with Todd. Phenomenal influence on my career, just from the standpoint of one of those people who doesn't tell you what you need to do, but if you watch and you pay attention, the information's there of how you want to carry yourself. So a really impactful one. Stayed all 5 years there. Tremendous opportunity, and then ultimately from there, National Swine Registry for 3 years. Clint Schwab hired me there again. He left to go to Maschhoffs. I stayed another year, then went to Smithfield for 5 years, which was awesome. Brought us back to Iowa, actually, though, because my wife worked for NPPC. Stayed there for a couple of years, still worked for Smithfield, and then ultimately Clint recruited me back to Maschhoffs. That time we were getting ready to launch what was Acuity, is where we kind of first met, and then ultimately now AcuFast. And it was probably, not to be political, but living in Illinois during COVID was probably not the greatest time. We couldn't go to parks, couldn't do anything, and it just was a little restrictive. And the opportunity to come back home to Iowa and be remote, have family close, kids were getting older, just created that. So we've been here 4 years. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. My wife stays home with them. A year ago, my mom moved into the same neighborhood as me. My aunt lives in the neighborhood. My dad lives 15 minutes down the road. She would have been my stepmom for 20 years, but isn't anymore. She lives a half mile, 3/4 mile up the road. So it's nice to kind of have all that support close to be able to do this. And that's kind of where we are today and what we're doing. And I rambled there for a bit, so maybe jump into something else, but at least kind of gives you why I'm back in Muscatine and kind of my path to get into swine genetics.
Well, that's great that you're able to be back home, and you're reliving what I did in 2007 when we left Iowa to come back to Indiana to be close to home. And I think that's one of the things that our industry is understanding, that the family component and shuffling people all over the country like some of the non-livestock do, it's kind of taboo these days.
Yeah, we lived a lot of places and I enjoyed it. Saw a bunch, met a bunch of people, time in North Carolina twice for me, once with my wife, Indiana for 3 years with National Swine Registry, lived there in Lafayette, back to Iowa, the Des Moines area, then down in southern Illinois, and just enjoyed it tremendously. But having the familiar, not that I ever wanted to move back to Muscatine, but when you have that familiarity and that comfort, it allows one less stressor on your mind when you're traveling through that process, because there's just support, right? There's not, she breaks down or something happens, what's going to happen, because there's friends, but friends are never really the same as family, at least for me. And number of family members, you can call them any time of day, anything, and that's just that comfort that allows you to focus on your job more when you're traveling, because there's support here for the family while you're gone.
Oh, definitely. That comfort is heartening. Makes it better for us when we travel. And as you were talking, it's interesting how you're genetics, I'm nutrition, but our paths have crossed. So John Mabry, his wife and my wife used to fox hunt together when we lived in Iowa on horses.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ken Stalder, he and I were collaborated on some projects a long, long time ago. Steve Moeller, back in the mid-'90s, right after he had gone to Ohio State, he hosted me when I went out there to test, to certify for ultrasound, put me up in his apartment. Yeah. It's a diverse but tight industry that we work in.
It is, and it's, whatever the comment you want to be, but, every interaction's an interview. Mm-hmm. And I saw, actually, it was, I don't remember who I saw, but the other day of, you don't know whose toes, be careful whose toes you step on, because you don't know if those are to the rear that you're going to have to kiss later in your career. Because just that aspect, it's such a small industry that doesn't mean to not be true to who you are, but at the same time, you have to carry respect with those interactions, because you never know. You can't always focus on who you think is going to be important in your career, because there's a lot of people that could be important in your career that you at the time don't think they are. And so giving that respect to the interactions and the desire to create those relationships that you never know when they're going to pay off. Mm-hmm. And not that you're doing it for that, but just being cognizant of the importance of them, because you just never know. And it's such a small industry, and there's a ton of overlap.
You're just a little bit younger than me, so I've seen things more of a consolidation than you have. And that group of people that we used to work with went from a big balloon to a smaller balloon. And I think back to some of the first AASV meetings I went to, and the banquet hall was just huge. The day I got to sit with my advisor, Jim Nelson, and Dr. Tom Stein at the same table, and Dr. Stein saying, I have empathy, but sympathy for you. Like, you're a jerk. But anyways, I was 22, 23, something like that. Well, Justin, we could jump into genetics and data and talk about pig systems, but a lot of people are talking now about how our industry, and particularly the pork industry's changed. I'd like to talk about how you grew up kind of traditional in the 80s, trying to survive, had cattle, went to the National Swine Registry, which a lot of us in the industry kind of relate to old-fashioned traditional genetics, working with smaller producers, to working with some of the big boys in Smithfield and Maschhoffs. So could you spend a little time how you were able to make that transition and maybe talk about how our industry's transitioning?
For sure. It's a really good question. And actually, Clint and I kind of have unique backgrounds because of that. So, I was by no means, I didn't show pigs really, showed cattle, and it was county fair. Maybe some national breed shows, but not anywhere near the level of competition or investment that many people do today, which is a whole other topic we can talk about, of the lack of, there's no ability to diversify in child activities today. You're either all in or all out. But anyway, back to the point. So the judging background, going through that, always interested in the youth. And actually in North Carolina, when I was in graduate school, judged quite a few shows, and through Todd's, interaction in the extension. And then actually he was, my first year of my Ph.D., he was appointed interim department chair. Mm-hmm. And so with that, part of his negotiation was to get me a 3/4 time assistantship. And then I helped with some of his extension responsibilities to kind of free him up. Not a bunch by any means, he still did a ton, but at least some exposure. So that aspect of being involved in the industry, but also still involved in youth, was something that I really enjoyed in my graduate career. So after graduate school, I had done an internship with PIC between my master's and PhD with Dave Casey, who I still is one of the most genuine humans I've interacted with, and really appreciate what he did for me that summer and some follow-up projects. And he had a position open and, offered that after graduate school with PIC, and it was a great opportunity and, a clear for tremendous growth in the genetics field, but that swine youth part was a little more lacking. One, because of the state, right? Nothing against Tennessee, but it's not a huge youth show pig state. Yeah. And also just from the standpoint of, the company itself, while they've done a lot more today with sponsoring and through that, they weren't at the time, and nothing negative, it's just the way it was. Well, at the same time, Clint had that opportunity at the National Swine Registry that really combined three things. So one, the purebred producers, PureTech, had kind of started coming together they were together for a year or two. It was the 5 largest that were really still left: Waldo's, Whiteshire, Temple, Schaefer, and Cedar Ridge. And then there was really, I think, a plan for them to move forward and be successful at that time. And this was a chance to come in and interact with them, still do the youth thing because of the NJSA as well as the state of Indiana, and be connected to that. And then the third part was the international. They were doing a lot of foreign market development through the Purebred Association. And so I got to travel internationally a ton those 3 years. And it was a great time, learned a ton, look back, and boy, was I naive. Boy, did I probably not contribute much to what they were looking to do, but learned a bunch, met my wife there, so, can't complain, right? And in that, actually, was where the Maschhoffs started their genetic program, which was based on Cedar Ridge. And through that conversation, I still was remembering Effingham Equity's office over Christmas break, essentially Christmas break one year. We met with Bradley Walter, Freddie Groman, myself, and Clint about, okay, they're starting this. We're off testing pigs in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it was. How are we going to do a genetic program for this? Well, they had their approach, and it was going to be great. And they chose to work with us for that first couple of years. So then that got exposed into the big systems, genetics, and I was like, okay, what we're doing here is going to be a struggle. And not to be a quitter, but as I think about just the resources being put forth and the ability of what those larger systems were doing, really started turning my wheels of like, okay, here's an opportunity to kind of look at something else. Ultimately, they hired Clint to go run that. I had done my PhD work in the Smithfield system. birth weight, impact of birth weight on survival and some of those aspects. So I had large familiarity with that group, and one of my former colleagues, co-graduate students, whatever you would call them, former graduate student at the same time as me in graduate school, Kent Gray, had been hired and was working at Smithfield. They'd had some people leave. They were looking to do some restructuring and split some duties out. So himself, Kent, and Perry Harm started kind of recruiting me after Clint had left. And I was like, okay, I loved North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Here's a chance to go back. We didn't have kids. We weren't married yet. We got engaged that summer. We moved there. It was just a chance to kind of get back into that and create exposure to a system that I wouldn't have gotten where I was. So I'd kind of done my international thing where it's like, oh, great, the person cleaning my house had been here more in the last month than I had, kind of that tip of the cap. You're traveling all over. You're like counting your miles, that type of life, right? Enjoyed it. But I was like, okay, what are we going to do next? And the time at Smithfield was tremendous. Loved the time in North Carolina. Had an opportunity to sit in rooms with people that you go, okay, I shouldn't be in a room with these people at my age, and you look back at the time, you're kind of naive, but you look back and go, the people I had a chance to build relationships with are like hugely impactful in the industry that I wouldn't have had in other situations. And then the learning of what an integrated system thinks about, and they were working with Prestige heavily in a couple operations in Mexico on the genetic side. So I got a huge exposure again, that as I think about what I'm able to do today, it's simply be willing to listen and understand and hear there and learn from those groups, connect it with others and bring it into this. And so one of my things is the willingness to say, and I've said this to students as well, willingness to say yes, and not yes to everything, because that can be the new stupid if you say yes to everything, but a chance to at least test things out, try them, go, and ultimately it becomes into a path that I don't think I did myself with a bunch of studying or an intentionality. But you see opportunities arise, you see them, you say yes, and then you're like, oh, yeah, this is impactful, and you look back and you go, this was a really key decision in my life that I probably didn't think about it as much at the time. But then as I look back, I go, okay, that was there. So a bit of a ramble to the point that the ability to switch and have that exposure and have that interaction, because I think there's still a part, to be honest, of my time at NSR that drove such a level of empathy and connection for the producers, because those breeders were producers. You were in there, they weren't large entities, they were family organizations, and the realization that this is a job for me. And I don't mean it's a job for me I think about it as I don't love it, I don't enjoy getting up, but this is a job that I can find another one if I need to. These are these people, multiple generations of doing something. It is passed from family to family. They're making decisions that are truly their farms, their facilities, these things that and then the producers we worked with today, I see that same thing. It's no longer an aspect of just how do I get money and how to get money. How do we sell something to them? It's selling to them in a way that I just respect what our inputs mean to them, that I think I wouldn't have that same level of empathy had I not spent those 3 years with NSR, at least the way I connected in my mind. Because it's just such a deeper appreciation for what those people do every day, and those people seems like attached, right? I make money myself, my income, off people in the industry by providing a service. I'm not out there every day feeding pigs, raising, or worrying about those things. I'm helping them do it. And so when I see that, it just helps me have that better appreciation for what they do.
I love what you talked about your time at NSR, because that allowed you to work with people that were grounded. And when you worked with those people, the five you talked about, two of them were within 40 miles of my house right now. You were talking to the herdman, the CEO, the man that talked to the bank, the man that made feeding decisions, in 2 or 3 people in an organization. So you got to talk to everybody that was a decision. How did that help you when you went to Smithfield and Maschhoffs, where it was no longer 2 or 3 people, it was 2 or 3 people on this committee and 2 or 3 people in this committee, and you had those silos you had to work with to convince to do something from a genetic standpoint?
It's a great question. And, I don't think it was an intentionality thing again, like an intentional choice, but for whatever reason, I've been blessed with one of my strengths and probably worked on it, that whether it's in a boardroom with a CEO or a president, or it's on farm with a herdsman or stock person, whatever you want to call them, I feel comfortable. Two of my summers in college, I worked construction, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it. I learned a lot of words I probably knew, and I learned how to speak them even more fluently from a swearing standpoint. But I also, just learned an appreciation for, additional walks of life beyond what I came from and what I am personally. And so through that, through the ability at NSR, I always think about Bill Temple, and he was whatever age at the point, still formulating the diets, right? He'd go out and grind the feed, and it was his thing. He ran the show, and he was like, I don't remember the exact story, but Valerie's like, he doesn't want to give it up. Like that's what he wants to do. It's what he loves doing. It's his thing. And so you just see the aspect of there's nothing that is below someone. When the owners are out there doing it and they're in the barns, like there's nothing below them, right? Because they're also in the meetings to have the PureTech strategy meetings, and through that, and then they're home feeding and choring and pulling pigs or whatever it may be that next day. And so that appreciation, that ability to build the connection, the relationship, that's somebody that makes more money than I ever will, or it's worth more money than I'll ever be, to somebody that's maybe making $15 an hour. And in the end, they're all humans, and they all deserve the time to have the relationship and the connection. And that's probably extrapolated a bit, but through those components, I think has made the kind of goes back to that everything's an interview. It's that interaction. You just never know, and everybody deserves to be treated with a level of respect, consummate with being a human. And I think that helped guide some of that. And it also allows you to, at least for me, to realize where I am and try to show up in that manner. And not meaning that I'm fake or I'm different, but in an attempt to meet people where they are, with a level of integrity and genuineness that doesn't feel fake, but also just allows a connection to be built regardless of their background or their status, if you will, in the company. So I think that helped feed that and foster it through that process.
Mm-hmm. I tried to write this several years ago, and it was in response to a large farmer in Indiana being touted as having the ability to be an ambassador and whatever. And I did a really bad job of it. But I tried to say that people like you and me, Justin, we can go talk to the guy that's swinging the hammer. We can have mud on our boots, talk to them. We could walk around a pig farm and get pig manure on our boots and go talk to whoever's in charge of breeding and be able to ask them questions. They'll answer, and the boss thinks he knows the answer. Then the next day we could put on a suit and tie and go talk to the boardroom at Cargill or Maschhoffs or wherever. And I think that's what our industry has, because we're just farm boys trying to sell stuff to other farm boys. That's not sexist. Farm boy is a generalization here.
When I say when I say some of my team, hey guys, thanks guys, and I was like, in general, if you're from Iowa, guys is non-gender specific. Yes. It's just a generalized group of people. Same thing, right? It's that aspect of understanding where we came from, and understanding that we're not better or worse than anybody else. From the standpoint of we all deserve respect, and we may that doesn't mean the value contributed is different and everybody gets a blue ribbon, but it is the judge and shows, right? Of I can't remember which one said it. For a lot of people it was a judge, somebody who's judged far more and far better than I. But essentially, that county fair isn't probably less today, but at one point was everybody's kind of big culmination. They put a lot of time and work into getting there. They deserve your time to effectively and genuinely evaluate those animals, because they put the work in to do that. Does that mean they're all the same? No. But they at least deserve the respect of the time for you to take a look, to speak to them, to interact with them, and give them the time, and then you rank them based on the actual quality of the animal, but you at least give them the time, not just in and out, like say, I'm here to collect a paycheck.
That sounds like a Ryan Reichism.
It might be. It was something. I watched some of those, the various, kind of final drive speeches, and a lot of them have some similarities because a lot of those people think about things the same, and it's their opportunity, and that they come from similar backgrounds. But and I think that might be Ryan. That might have been one where I saw him say that. So it's small world because I think Ryan's pretty open about his passion for Miss America, the pageants. He's big, and my wife is big into pageants, and so she showed livestock as well and has some connections there, and would follow him on social media about pageants as well as shows. So it's in general, they're very similar in terms of the things we think about and evaluate. So it's just always funny about those connections, right? Like, my daughters do them, my wife's big into them, and one of the biggest and currently, I'll say, famous livestock judges is also very passionate about pageants in America.
Ryan Reich is an enigma, and it's not the first time he's been brought up on my podcast. So, but
he had some pretty good final drive speeches, and it really hits the point of, and I appreciate the perspective a lot of those.
Oh yeah,
mostly guys I've seen, but women as well. They share their perspectives in those final drives.
I consider myself part of a transition generation. I've talked about it before that I was born in 1970, right after the Civil Rights Act. I remember seeing the first black people on television, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Electric Company. I went to an integrated high school, so I dealt with some of those challenges. So I consider that a transition. You're just a little bit younger than me, but I think we both are in that transition that is still dealing with the impacts of the 80s farm crisis. And when I talk about us just being farm boys and farm kids selling to other farm kids, as our industry continues to consolidate, and we're farrowing 6 million sows 2.5 times a year, 2.3, but those 6 million sows are controlled by fewer and fewer people, and it maybe we could say it's plateaued, whatever. I see that people that are in positions to replace us down the road don't have that same farm boy where they're masters of a lot of things or they're exposed to a lot of things, but not masters in one. How do you think our industry is going to handle that, where we got a whole bunch of experts and not a lot of people that are just yeomans?
Yeah, it's a good question and a fair question, right? Because I would even argue to myself, I'm a little bit of a unique transition myself because of the divorced family living in town predominantly, and I didn't share it. But when I got into 4-H and showing, I went from every other weekend to like halftime, right? So weekends mostly were on the farm, so I could work with my livestock through that. And but I would even consider myself versus some of my friends who were full-time family, because we had I don't want to say a hobby farm, but 60 cows and a couple hundred acres. It wasn't a full-time farming operation. So even my exposure to the true farming versus some of the other people my age wasn't the full boat, if you will, right? Because it wasn't, okay, we're getting up every weekend and we have a bunch to do, and we're combining, we're milking cows, we're farrowing pigs, whatever that is. It was a little bit different, right? And so that's the interesting thing. It goes into the sports thing as well, as I talked about. There's just such a level of specialization in youth, and I think to an extent probably when we get into education as well, that there isn't as much of that, maybe a jack of all trades, master of none type thing, because of the exposure is, example, I'm going to jump around here, but my daughter, she's 8, and I think she dances 6 hours a week and loves it. Absolutely loves it and wants to go. And it's not like, hey, we don't fight her to go. You don't have to go. Like, if you start fighting and you don't want to do this, we have a lot better things to do with our time. But if you want to go every day and you want to do that and you're going to do it, then great. Like, it's better than sitting at home doing nothing. And it's just this aspect of how the specialization has driven us. Because if you go in and you're like, all right, I'm not specialized in showing livestock, soccer, baseball, whatever it is, there isn't this recreational level. There's very little of this recreational level of anything that can be fun and you can still compete. Now, let me make sure to say it's not all about winning, but if you're recreational showing livestock and you get 7th in class at everything, you have zero chance because you're paying not that much, $500 for one barrow and everybody else is paying $2-3 grand for 10. It's hard to have that be fun when you don't have a chance to at least think you're going to win. And it's the same thing in a lot of baseball, softball, whatever. So I kind of went down a different path with that answer, but I think it's also a picture into how we're going about things, that there's not as much just general, I do a lot of different things, learn a lot of different things. It's like, this is my path, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm going to be, which goes back to my statement about saying yes and trying things and getting exposed to them, because you don't really know until you've tried it. It's, I think I'd love to do that. You don't know you'd love to do that until you've actually done it. You think you do. And that's why I work with my daughter. I would never do that. You don't know until you're in that situation. Like, we can say I would never do that, but until you've been in there and lived that, you don't know what the hell, sorry, I'm explicit. You don't know what the heck you're going to do because you haven't been in it. And it's just not, that's the part about this, I think that I want to make sure to continue to push, is that we do get exposed to things. I think about my jobs growing up of a cook at a bar. I did some cleaning at some restaurant, or actually a tax service place. Announced sporting events for high school. Obviously helped on various farms. Did construction around Subtile actually for 2 summers. Also did I did yard work for a lady, Ada Mae Lewis. Was a great influence in my time at Iowa State. I helped Wendy Powers kill spent hens one summer. Collected some fecal samples. It's much easier when you collect it outside the body versus inside the body on pigs. Just got that exposure to all these things that have zero relevance to what I do today, but I think were key parts of learning and experiencing and creating a level of empathy, right? You get mad at somebody at the restaurant because it's messed up. Well, I've cooked. I know what it's like. Mm-hmm. You make mistakes. Things happen. It's no big deal. Like, hey, like it's food, right? It happens. Like, when you've done that and been through it, your empathy is able to be there. You just have a level of respect for what everybody else does. I don't know if that was a question you asked, but I went down it anyway.
I think you're right. And your sports analogy is a good one because it's applicable to a lot of people and they can understand it. And I don't know what basketball coach it was. It might have been a basketball coach, but he talked about how I would rather have a 3-sport player come and do his best, because then he's got the experience that you talked about, than a 1-sport player that's been playing baseball since he was 6 or whatever the sport is. And I think in our specialization in our industry in life pulls us away from those experiences that you brought about that make us better people to better understand.
I think so.
And if you think about our roles as a nutritionist, you as a geneticist, how many times are you brought into a situation where your problem that you have to address is only genetics? I bet it's 0.
Well, I would say it's never. It's
there you go. It's always the nutritionist, or it's always the vet. It's the vet's fault.
It's right. And that's, I think, the aspect of how we bring value to these larger systems. Your question earlier about the consolidation is different, right? Because a lot of times you're not going versus the early part in your career. You probably went into the organization and the ones you were interacting with, and there was no nutritionist there. It was maybe they had some, but a lot of the people you're dealing with, you were their nutritionist. In this case, not that there's a lot of geneticists in the business, but there's a lot of scientists in the room, a lot of people that understand things, and it's not like the discussion is different. It's not an aspect of like, hey, I've got to be, like they're not looking for us to wow them with all this science and this news. It's like, what really matters? Like, let's dive into this, because I get it, right? I get you can make a beautiful trend in a genetic thing, and it means nothing if I'm not seeing it, right? You're not wowing me with how smart you are. I'm not intimidated by that or not. Like, I want to understand, and I want to make sure what you tell me is going to happen happens. And so that's the part of that shift of, rarely is it just a single. I mean, I joke about this, but there are things that are probably singularly could be nutrition, because it is such an impactful item that they need. That, okay, this is clearly a diet, and whether you want to say nutrition or formulation or milling, which I know are all in the same thing, but are three very different parts of it that need to work together. Like, okay, here's the basic that we understand of the nutritional aspect. Was it formulated right based on the assumptions, and then was it actually milled right to do that? But on the genetic side, it's much more like, hey, what are we seeing here? And then, we're dealing with something where we got to make sure the question isn't two things. One, it's not immediate, like, no, that's not us, that's not genetics. But also not to the point of where you get so focused on it, what the cause is, potential causes, that you miss the rest of it. And we're working through that, and one of the guys I work with had a really good impact to me, to really push me on that, of making sure, as I'm leading this with a group, that we hold ourselves accountable to continuing to explore the bigger picture, versus just being focused on this, because we could miss the real cause.
Oh, totally.
So yeah, to answer your question, it's rarely a one thing. It's this kind of bigger interaction of multiple things.
And if you don't have exposure to outside of your little world in our business, then you'll miss that other thing. And I'm thinking about a genetic example. They can come in and say, your boar sucks. Real easy. I mean, you've heard it. I've heard it from the feed standpoint. If you're not experienced, you're going, okay, what did our boar do? But it could have been a breeding problem. It could have been the way that they're handling semen when it came from the courier. It could have been how they were preg checking. So many things that could fall into your boar sucks that probably has absolutely nothing to do with the boar.
And then that aspect of you can, but it's not ideal just go, you're wrong. My boar doesn't suck. Because that doesn't get you anywhere either, right? And so it's how you listen and hear, and then truly seek to understand, and then maybe guide to the right answer. Mm-hmm. But also, when it is the boar sucks, you admit it and you accept it, and you accept that and say, we'll do better, and here's what we're going to do. I think it then gives you the ability later to have the conversation when it isn't the boar, right? That it kind of prove yourself that you will admit it when it's there, and be like, hey, like, I don't oversee the genetics, which I guess I didn't share earlier. So I oversaw the genetics. Today I would just, not just, but I oversee the sales. So we've grown and split enough that I don't oversee the technical teams today, but I work with them very closely. But I always joked, like, I'm not a good enough geneticist to move it that direction that fast. I'd love to, but I'm not.
So you do get your boar sucks calls.
I do. And that's the aspect of, the different background is, I think there's a level of comfort. By no means, the people we have overseeing the genetics program today, actually it's a small world. One of the main people is Todd C's son, Garrett, would lead a big part of our genetic program. So, the aspect of what that group can do, and do in a way that I just wasn't built to do, is exciting, but I still have enough familiarity that I can understand what they're doing and speak to it. I can't do it as well as them or as efficiently as them, but I can understand it enough to kind of, I think, to better serve the customers, because I understand what's coming, what's going. My bigger thing is working and building on the sales side, but the aspect of understanding that technical, I think, has been a valuable to my career.
Well, it sounds like you and I are a lot alike, Justin. I describe it as when I talk to people. If you want me as a nutritionist to be able to regurgitate every single paper on the tryptophan to lysine ratio and then how that integrates with the energy ratio, yeah, ain't me. But if you want me to work and make sure that we got the rations that have an appropriate tryptophan to lysine ratio that works in your system with your meals, yeah, let's talk. I'm sure that Alan Schinkel would talk circles around you about this beta and using this one, but there's things that you can bring to the table that professional geneticists can't.
So small world. Doris Boulay was at the end of the drive, the lane, the dead end road to my dad's back 40. And I'm pretty sure, I think it was direct aunt to Alan Schinkel. Oh. Alan Schinkel was born and raised in Walcott, Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just north of the truck stop, I believe, or just south. Just north or just south. I can't remember which way, but close to the truck stop, which is 30 minutes from my house, probably. But yeah, when we were talking one time, that Doris Boulay, which was a property down there by Wildcat Den, kind of just north of there, I'm pretty sure it was his aunt. And it was at least some family member, but I believe it was his direct aunt. So,
that's funny.
Small world.
Because Alan was on my Ph.D. committee.
And to add to another one, Tom Rathje's from Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you think about geneticists in the swine one, we got a couple counties here that aren't far away from having a few that have, beyond our normal contribution in those three in this eastern Iowa part versus you look at the rest of the demographics in the U.S.
So if we think back to your background, and you and I are similar background, I grew up in town, did the same thing as you. I worked on the fox farm, I worked on a pig farm. How does the diversity of your background, your experiences with judging, dealing with people, your education, and then dealing with NSR, we had the CEO, the CFO, and the grunt all in one person. How does that help you work with those different silos in both your former positions and your position now that exist in these large systems because they have to have those silos?
I'd be lying if I said I had it figured out or did it well. I think I still struggle at times, well, internally, probably more than externally, with silos of, sometimes I see resistance and I like to lean into resistance. But when I think about it externally from the standpoint of businesses, it goes back to that willingness and that attempt to meet them where they are, and to kind of think through that you can build those relationships. Again, not perfect or say it, but it just to understand the value that everything brings, I think is where that opportunity to have it, or to be successful in that is when you can understand the silos are there and the responsibilities are different, but then also seek to see the value that each one brings. Maybe that helps reduce them a little bit, because they're not. I think sometimes silos are created through that process of protecting the importance of, like, hey, this is what I do and it's really important. One joke was at a large system, I'll remain it nameless, and the person that said it was, I'm pretty sure this group, it was the transport group, thinks we raise pigs so they have something to haul around. Versus, them realizing, like, hey, our main thing is raising and producing pigs. None of the rest matters. We're not built to make sure we do our accounting right. No, our accounting's built to support our processes for the government component, but also to give us information to help run the business better. And so that's the aspect of, what we do is what we do, raise pigs. For us, it's cell genetics. That's what we do, is deliver genetic potential to our customers. All the other parts of the business are to help us do that as efficiently and effectively as possible. Mm-hmm. And not just that we deliver it, that the customer realizes it and uses it. And so when we think about our core thing is delivering genetic potential and helping the customer achieve it, all the other entities in our business have to understand that's the core. And outside of that, the rest are supporting to that, to ensure we can do it well. And I think the same thing in a production company, like, we're raising pigs. That's what we do. Everything else has to support that process versus like, oh, again, I'm gonna use the transport one. Like the transport is a part of that, and figuring out how to do that. How do we support this? How do we get there? Versus like, oh, we can't do that. That's no. Well, no, we have to move those pigs then. What's the best way to do it? Because that's key to, like, we don't have the space. They need the space. They need this. They need whatever it is. The feed. Well, we can't feed on that. No. Yeah, we do need to figure out something because pigs still have to eat. So that's a little bit of a soapbox. But that aspect of understanding what is the core thing we're doing and everything else around that is supporting to it. That doesn't mean they're not important. It just means they are a cog in ensuring this works.
Well, Justin, you have me at a pickle because as a podcast interviewer, I've got two paths I could go down. I'm taking that suggestion that Jim Nelson gave me, repeat the question so you have a chance to think about your answer. I'm going to go back to my interview with Jim Bishop I just had 2 weeks ago. Jim's mission in life is to help people understand where they are, come out of their shells, be themselves. And that book ends really well with my discussion with Mark Foers. And both of those talked about leadership. One of the consistent themes between them and other people I talked about leadership is communication. So as you work with entities, whether it's been in your past life or working with your customers, what you just articulated about the trucking group knowing that we're selling pigs, not so that they can transport them, but it's part of what we do. How many times have you seen the communication of a company's mission failed?
Side note, I'm pretty sure I met Jim Bishop when he was leading sales for the swine. The Eastern Regional. Daryl Tice was my roommate / landlord, and he worked for Landco down in North Carolina. And I'm near certain there was an event where he was reporting to Jim, and Jim was there, and I met him briefly 15, 12 years ago. It might have been even a golf thing. Anyway, but the name was familiar. I was like clicking. I was like, I'm pretty sure I have. Just talking about the small world part.
Oh, yeah.
I would say, and this isn't negative, all defines what a failure is. Is a failure gradient, and there's a pass-fail, or is anything other than essentially unachievable perfection of failure? So where that gradient of failure is it 50%, 70, 80%? But I would say the majority of them there's always gaps. I think everywhere I've been, there's gaps in that, and some gaps are bigger than others. I do believe there are entities in the world that are true differentiators. I've not been a part of them, but when you look at true differentiators that have just changed certain things, I'm trying to even think of some, right? But there probably are where they got it nearly fully right. And there's a belief in that communication. Everybody does it, and they just march to that drum. You know, as I think our entity, for example, is getting better at it. I think there's been a couple things, right? So there was one where Fast sold to High Life in whatever it was, early 2000s. Then ST bought them, or Sexing Technologies bought them in 2015. And kind of let them operate on their own. And then they bought Acuity in 2022. And then we had a change in leadership, nothing negative, but somebody kind of semi-retired or moved separately, and we brought a new person in to lead the group. And so there's been this evolution that we're getting better at it. But I think if you were to go query the entire 200 or 196 employees or whatever we had of what that is and how well that's communicated, to me, a perfect score would be everybody could relate it to what they do and could communicate it, not because we mandated them to resuscitate or recite it, right, and just go through it, but they learn it, they see it, and they connect it to what they do every day. I don't know what a good number is. I would say in some entities, if you can get over half the people, you're probably in a good spot because you're so broad, right? You literally have employees, not literally. Now I'm talking like my 8-year-old daughter, right? You have employees that have been there and are checking the time clock at $15, $16 an hour and you don't know if they're going to show up tomorrow or the next day or that, right? But you need them there. To people that are making well into six figures aspect, that have been doing this forever and are never worked anywhere else and are like tied to this, and so that just how you get that to be related to everybody is not an easy thing, because there's such different backgrounds and then such different roles. And so I give grace to entities that don't, because it's not easy. And I think it's one of those that we always aspire to continue to be better, and the aspect of continuing to work towards it and do more towards it is a big part of the success. Because I know a little bit, the image in my mind is the big brother, little brother, like you got the hand on their head and they're trying to run to you and they can't reach it type thing, right? I had a brother 7 years younger than me, so there was an ability 6 years younger than me to do some of that, right? But it's like that kind of feel like it's a difficult challenge to do. But I think just continuing to push and trying and getting there is a big part of that success or not.
Do you think it's more difficult in livestock production because we're not making widgets, we're making animals that are biological units?
I don't know about in the mission part or that kind of communication, but definitely in the day-to-day tasks, right? I think about it like there are way easier things to sell for a variety of reasons than genetics. One, it's a long sales cycle, right? Because it's in and out. You don't have that many widgets. I think about nutrition or at least nutrition companies, or at least companies that they'll sell additives, have half dozen, you don't have, what are your problems you're seeing today? Generically, but you get around to asking them in that way. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of dive into it and you have a bunch of different solutions that can fit different things. With genetics, it's like, okay, how mad are you at your genetic supplier? Do you need genetics that they don't have? Or, do we have something transformational that you want to jump into? Because it's not like it's an aspect of you go in and you say, hey, okay, I got a really big issue with whatever it is. I got E. coli scours in the nursery, need to work through something. Okay, here's 3 or 4 different products we have that we could work through to take a look at that and take a look. Okay, like that's your number 1, 2, 3, 4 thing. You just, the genetics component is there. So I give you that. That's harder. The pig part of the component of the supply chain of delivering them, it's not, you go in, you run and you're producing the same number of widgets every single day. Mm-hmm. Here's your exact role. But I think it's also some of the excitement of it. Because every day can be different. Every day can be different even on a sow farm, right? Is you don't know what you're going to go into. And it in the negative, but can create a little bit of excitement because it is something a little bit different. It doesn't always be monotonous in that aspect of, living in Muscatine, right? With Han Industries. Well, I think they've changed their name, but
it's HNI right now. Yeah.
Yeah. HNI. I grew up with Han, all steel. Now it's HNI, and then they just bought Steelcase or merging with Steelcase or whatever. So they're like the world's largest, I think, a producer of office furniture, right? So I had a lot of friends there. My dad worked there. Actually, my stepdad worked there for a long time too. So a lot of family members worked there, but some of those roles on the line are zoop, zoop, zoop. Next one, zoop, zoop, zoop. Okay, when's my break? And it's that, and it needs to be done. And it absolutely needs to be done. And somebody needs to do it, and I'm glad they do it, and they make a living, they take care of their family, they put great. I think I would go crazy doing that all day.
Yeah.
But I've had exposure to excitement. I've had exposure to all these other things that are out there that then to go back to that is different than that's all I ever did. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know there was something else out there better. So that's the part of a little bit of a long-winded answer to that is I think there are absolutely more challenges because it is animals and it is something new every day. But that's also the exciting thing. Like that's the reason why I think people do. There's a lot easier ways to make money than any sort of agriculture, farming, swine. There's just a lot of easier ways, consistent ways, probably less stressful ways to make money from a living standpoint. But that component of the people, the animals, the kind of altruistic or the aspect of feeding and creating food, the way of life that's often associated with agriculture, the Midwestern values. It's a lot of those kind of externalities, if you will. Mm-hmm. Actually, my undergrad was econ, ag business, so When we think about externalities, that's a lot of what comes into making what is agriculture, farming, swine, pork, whatever it is, at least to me, why you do it. Why I do it. I'm not making a judgment on when anybody else does it, but why I choose to do it.
Because making widgets is easy. Like you said, you come in every day, you drill a hole, you put a rivet in, and you make a widget. In your situation, if you had a new boar that was magically E. coli resistant, it's going to take 150 days to see if that really is true. If you start using semen today, right?
And then rightfully so, and I'm just using names here, right? But rightfully so, if I go and prove it to Carthage, that means nothing to Pipestone or Swine Bat Center, right? Like, you have to then go prove it with all of them, or at least prove it in a way that they believe that's a third party or something. And I respect that, right? These are hundreds of millions, at least tens of millions of dollars decisions. They want to base it on information in their system that they believe. And so you start moving into that. It's not like, okay, here's the product, you'll convince a bunch of people on it. You got to prove it in all these situations. And so it is that timeline, right? And okay, you start getting uptake and you get enough where it's in the system, people will believe it without having to be in their own. But in the beginning, you got to convince each of these people individually. And I think this is fair to say, like, raising pigs is similar, but also it is absolutely real to see completely different results in different systems with what should be the same product. There's a lot of reasons for it, whether it's underlying health status or it's the way they feed or regions, whatever. But to go in and say this animal, in this basic genetic supply, this boar is going to be X dollars more than boar B in every scenario isn't realistic. And for a variety of reasons. And so that's why I appreciate and I can empathize with why they want it proved in their system. Because just because Joe up the road uses it doesn't mean it's going to make money for me in the same fashion.
I love your example of comparing Carthage to Pipestone to Maschhoffs to whatever, because it's bifurcated. On one hand, we're feeding pigs and we're just feeding pigs. There's no difference in feeding pigs. But the Pipestone system is different because of X, and the Carthage is because of Y. And you brought it up, whether it's building, whether it's nutrition, and that's what makes it frustrating and fun at the same time. Like, doggone it, this worked at Carthage, why isn't it working at Pipestone? And these are just hypotheticals, okay? We're just names, okay?
Yeah, exactly. It could be Smithfield and JBS. It could be Seaboard and Pipestone, or Seaboard and Prestige, right? It's just, when you think about it, it is different. And that's also what, to me, is so exciting in my role is I'm learning as much as I'm ever sharing because they all do it differently. And, the ability to go in and still, nobody has it figured out. Nobody's perfect. One of the ones I appreciate most, I've seen him present a few times, the JBS crew, Dr. Matthew Turner and a few of those of how get up there and they kind of, this is how we do it. And we reserve the right to get smarter. And there's a lot of places we still need to improve, but this is how we do it. And just that approach to go in and say, hey, like, they given at the survival conference and a few others, those kind of like, hey, here's where we're doing. And I just appreciate that approach to go like, this is how we do it. With our knowledge, this is the best way to do it today. We realize we don't know it all and there's other ways to do it. We don't execute perfect. And these are the things we're still trying to do, but hey, here's what's working for us. And we're trying to get better every day to do it. Not only get better at what we're doing, but also find ways to do it better, which is two different things, right? There's how do we improve in the processes we have today, and then how do we improve our processes that hopefully raise that ceiling of performance, and then we execute against those processes and level up.
Isn't that an expression, whether you're talking from a JBS leadership or Pipestone leadership or whatever, or you and I doing our job, isn't that an expression of maturity?
So I've heard this in sales too, and I think it's similar, but a little different is, giving us stuff away. Oftentimes, particularly entrepreneurs and people building their own businesses are afraid to give anything away. And I've seen people talk about, well, imagine if you build the thoughts of, if I'm giving this away for free, imagine what you would get if you gave me money. And I don't conceptually like it's, and I know I'm not an entrepreneur, but it's that concept of when they're so confident in their product and what they're delivering, that giving away a sample to an extent that they understand the value they get will then drive people to do that. But that's a big bridge to cross, right? And I'm not an entrepreneur to have been in that position, but conceptually I get it. It's like you're so confident in what you can deliver that you deliver a certain amount for free with the realization that people are going to jump at what you can deliver for the full kitty. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a similar aspect of when you get to the point of where you're confident in what you're doing and you're confident in your ability to continue to improve. I think there is a level of that aspect, but we're all competitors too. So it's a unique component. National Swine Improvement Federation. Go back to one of your things you talked about earlier of ASV and how big these meetings were. So in graduate school, one of the coolest things I would go to is National Swine Improvement Federation in early 2000s. It was a big meeting, 70, 80, 90, 100 people. And now it may struggle to get 50. But you'd go there and you'd have Newsham, you'd have Monsanto, you'd have Babcock. I mean, a list goes on of all these companies that were still in there. Plus, you probably had 6 or 7, 8 universities represented. And people were generally fairly open about what they shared. As a consolidation of genetic companies and universities kind of came, it's gotten less and less. And I think as an industry, there's been a little bit of a less, like so much of these large systems, their IP that they produce internally is viewed as a differentiator. And I respect that, right? It's kind of the way they think about it, but it also then has shrunk the knowledge sharing of our industry versus what our format was before. And I'm not here to say it's right or wrong, better or worse. It's absolutely different. And I fully respect the desire of those entities to do it because they're bringing their shareholders value and they're held accountable to continuing to do that. And they believe that's one of the ways to do it is that they can do things better or differently than the competitors because you can produce $1 a pig more in profit versus your competitors from whether it's coal sow marketing, and it's oftentimes the odd things, right? The coal sow marketing, transport, some nutrition things. It's not necessarily just PSY or more. It's a lot of these other things that can be some of that they can do differently and provide. It's a big deal for their shareholders. Shareholders variety, right?
Yeah.
Independent producers that are part of management companies, the owners, or publicly traded companies, whatever it may be.
When I was talking about maturity, I was thinking in the sense of tracking my career, because I remember some of the first sales calls I went on. I had example rations, I had trifle brochures, I had a stack of shit. I had answers, but I didn't know what freaking question was. I'm sure you face that when you walk in, or your salesmen walk in, and they have to be able to differentiate a perceived need with what is really happening.
For sure. And there's, I think, I will leave this person nameless. So when I was at Maschhoffs, I was still kind of a customer. We oversaw the boar stud, so I was a repro customer as well as a genetic customer, kind of both. That was when Amanda was part of my team and managed the boar studs. And so it was a reproductive company that came in and they were selling something. And I agreed to the meeting, sat in my office, and I'm not kidding. It was one of those small, we had a window outside, but cubicle type office, but it was closed off with glass. And I don't know if I said 15 words in the whole hour the person was in there. And that's the aspect of people are, I think in sales, can be so eager to share all this information. And I've also sat in meetings where I'm there for 2.5, 3 hours as the customer going, when is this going to end? Like, and the people just keep going. They're like on slide 50, and like, I got 120 to get through, and you're gonna take this whether you want it or not. I'm like, whoa.
But wait, there's more.
You can see I'm no longer engaged. And now I'm going to leave resentful, and that's probably the empathy aspect because I've sat through them. Now I'm going to leave resentful for the time you took of my time that I could have been doing something else where I wasn't getting any value from this. But yes, you checked the box off on the information you shoved at me. And so as a result, we've shifted around to like, hey, be very upfront. It'll be an hour. I may share information, but I just want to get to know you. Like, I'm not here to propose to you today. I just want to build a relationship. so that when we see each other, we can go from there, learn a little bit more. But I'm not here to ask you every single question. Like, I don't want it to be like a quiz and you share all this information, because you always feel like, how many sows do you have? Like, how many acres do you farm? Like, what's the, like, it just feels like those are kind of personal information to independent producers particularly, but you also kind of got to know what they're doing. And so you dive into the questions and you go through it without it being a quiz. But in that aspect of going in like, hey, I'm not here to check the box and shove this down you. I believe we can bring you value, but I have to see where your perceived challenges are, where your real challenges are. I know what you're using. I know what you're doing, so I have an idea of where my advantages may lie with my product, but I can't assume that because, for example, you may give two craps about having an extra PSY or an extra couple less % mortality, because and so it doesn't matter if I talk about that. But if I go in and say, hey, we got a system that's doing batch, that's taking a full barn out because they're emptying at 22 and 23 weeks instead of 25, 26. What's that mean for you? Those types of things, as you dive into them, you're able to bring that up, and that's the part of the maturity of going. And I think a lot of times we probably don't equip our salespeople right, young ones, and that's the one I'm big on when I try to hire to my team, is I want them to have the empathy. And the example I always give is when a load of gilts are delivered that are 50 pounds light, a salesperson without empathy goes, oh man, I'm sorry. We'll talk to him. The one with empathy goes, oh crap, those are missed breeds, because you can't make those breeds up. And I understand the impact of this system, and I understand that, and you kind of have that realization of what that means to them versus they're just angry at you. Like, you're understanding why they're angry, and that's the part of the empathy of the training them and understanding what the customer is going through. It just helps build rapport through that process and helps you as a salesperson be able to find ways to deliver value when you understand what they're going through. Not that you are experts or that, for example, I've never managed a sow farm, so I'm open like that. I've never managed one to be able to tell you that I know how to do that, but I have enough perspective on data and understanding to say, hey, have you ever looked at this? Have you ever thought about this? I know I've seen this work other places. Is this something? And you just kind of build that through that maturity of exposure and through there that you're not there to save the day. There's a marketing thing on the hero, right? Of marketing, oftentimes the product's the hero. No, the product's not the hero. Yeah. The person you're selling to is the hero. You're the supporting aspect to make that hero successful. And that's the same thing in sales. Is like we're not that important. From the standpoint of as important as we think we are, we're here to be a part of your success story.
I had an illustration when I was recently in China, and I wrote about it. And our industry is good at grasping matrices. You brought PSY. I mean, you think about Super Pollo. What were they masters at? PSY. What's Super Pollo now? Nothing. But they mastered PSY. It hit me when I was in China. I visited several farms, and every single one of those farms and every single salesman I was with said, we have to get feed conversion to 2.3. Every single one of them. So somehow it got pounded into the Chinese pig industry that 2.3 feed conversion was a magic number and we're going to be profitable. It's going to fix everything. Not once did anybody talk about profitability. They didn't talk about anything other than 2.3. And I think back to the challenges that you and I have had over our years with salespeople. We get caught up on these PSY, non-productive sow days, mortality, whatever, feed conversion. And we don't have the maturity to ask, hey, Justin, I know nothing about your system. I got assumptions, but let me learn about your system.
And I think that's a valid point of it's easier that way, right? If I'm going in as a salesperson who doesn't have a ton of confidence or experience, and I'm going in just to sell off, look, here's our top 20% doing 32 PSY, you're at 29, surely you can get there. Versus, and our product will get you there, right? We'll save the day for you. Versus going in and going, hey, you're at 30. I understand, and I'd love to get in and get your business and go from here, but at the same time, when you're at 30 and you don't really have any major challenges, a change in health, at best, we're going to be equal. And there's a real chance it could go down because you're switching to health. And so the maturity to step back and go, I'm not like trying to convince you of this today. The example I often give with my team, I'm not here to sell you a load of gilts next week. I'm here to sell you whatever gilts you need for the next 20 years, right? As long as you're in this. And I'll miss something today, or I'll go past it today to try to get it long term versus just trying to get it quoted today. And I think that's some of the things within the sales. I'm talking genetics only, it's probably different other words. Like, I don't want my team pushing for the short term. I mean, I want them to push for the short term, but not at the expense of the long term. So, hey, we got a terminal product that's competitive. They're using A or B. Maybe that one has some advantages. Don't even try to convince them, because they're doing this with that product. We're not going to compete there. We don't need to be that. Let them have that. But in these over here, I know we can bring value. We believe we can bring value, and here's why. You better be all over working hard on to get those, but making sure we help them see the areas where we have opportunities to really bring value versus just this assumption that we're going to bring value everywhere. That's not true. And it's either naive, ignorant, or just untruthful. Whatever the culture of the business is, I'm not sure which one of those it is, but to believe you can go in and bring everybody more value than they're getting today isn't true.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, whether it's the product, the system, whatever. Find those where you are and be like stink on crap after those, where we really believe. And when you really believe you can bring them value, it's a lot easier to be persistent.
I think your PSY example is a good one, where our service technicians in the genetics world and the salespeople need to understand the system, because that PSY difference could have absolutely nothing to do with the sow and have everything to do with differences in record keeping.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
We say the pig goes in at day 2. So if it died before day 2, then it doesn't count as a pig, or as opposed to day 1. I mean, what would that do to a PSY?
I'm just a big fan of gilts don't go into the farm until they're confirmed pregnant. That always helps your PSY.
There you go. I'm at 35. I'm really rocking it.
And that's the part of the maturity and the experience of, understanding what's important to the one you're working with and diving into it. Because I joke about it today, but the large systems, while not all perfect and not all doing it the same, they understand numbers. That you better show up with your big kid pants on, understanding numbers, because they'll quickly dive in and start doing calculations on numbers you show to them. I've had more than one with people friends with through the industry. They're presenting like, hey, your numbers don't jive there. What's going on?
Yeah. Because
they start doing the math.
Yeah.
And that myself included, right? I'm a skeptic by nature, which drives a lot of people crazy, but I start seeing things and I'm just diving in like, okay, that doesn't pass the gut test for me. There's something that's not there, like explain that. And whatever percent of the time I'm wrong and my gut's wrong, but other part is like, it doesn't smell right. You probably don't want to drink that milk.
Well, Justin, we've kind of come full circle talking about experiences and variety of experiences, your sports example of making you a well-rounded athlete, our experiences making us well-rounded technicians and farm boys, quote unquote. So I appreciate that. I end every one of my interviews with 5 questions, and I've kind of, the last couple didn't fit, but we're going to restart that with you.
Okay.
If you listen to Amanda, she answered them. So here, we'll dive right into them and we'll round this sucker out. First question is, what's one lesson that you learned from ag that you carry with you every day?
I think the big one for me is what I've said a couple times on here, is that though different, every person's contribution is valuable. It doesn't mean it's all the same or the outcome's the same or you need the same skills to do it, but you can't do a lot of things without all the people and the variety of people that are connected to it. And as such, they deserve respect for doing that job well, whatever that job may be.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Probably in ag, we're exposed to that a lot more. Whether it's the guy on the dock at the feed mill or the trucker that's backing up and loading hog to the CEO, they all have value.
especially like semen couriers and hog truck drivers. That's a big deal in breeding stock, both of those, and they would have more touch points with our customers than we would, and they're important people.
Then you better keep them happy because they'll tell the farm if they're not happy.
They will tell them everything.
If you could have coffee with any historical figure in agriculture, who would it be?
I think some of the, and I don't know which one per se, because I don't know from a personality standpoint or personal, like knowing them enough, just their impact on the industry. But you think of some of the geneticists, Lush, some of those that I don't know enough about them as humans, but just their impact on genetics 100 years ago when they were doing it with a pen and paper, and it's just mind-boggling the formulas that were done. And there's others in there, but that's probably the general thing. Just to understand like how it's easy today with math to think about it and equations and computers, but yeah, I think those would be some of the ones that at least would jump to me probably to start with.
You're talking about the people that breed the best of the best to get better and put math to it. Yeah.
Yes.
And they did that without a computer, like you said.
When there was no calculator, like it just that's the part of kind of came from nowhere. Nowhere's not right, but us adding on to it today is no big deal. But from where they started it and really pushed it is the.
Mm-hmm. And they did it with pencils they sharpened with a knife.
Exactly.
What is one quirky or underappreciated thing in ag that more people should know?
I don't know if it's a quirky thing or underappreciated. It's just like how personal it is for people. How, for example, right, the thing I said earlier about a lot easier way to make money and selling, but like I can't imagine. Like I struggle to ever imagine going into just selling or doing things outside of something in agriculture. And maybe that's just a comfort level and familiarity there, but I think there's just an aspect of whether it's cattle or really birds would probably be a harder one for me, but there's just enough connection, I think that there's a level of familiarity that any place I would go to, there's something I can build a connection with, I think in agriculture, that just gives me a little level of comfort, that we have such similarities, I think would be the component.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's quirky or not, but
whether you're feeding chickens or you're riding herd out in the southwest of Kansas, or you're raising onions in Modesto Valley, we're all just a bunch of farm boys, farm people, just raising food for people. And I don't mean that in a thank me, I'm raising your food. I mean, we're just raising food.
Yeah, and there's a connection there that's similar. You can have a shared experiences that are, in the crop when you got one crop, and that's your chance for the year. Now, obviously, the insurance programs and others have saved that.
Oh yeah.
But same thing in that, you get a health thing in any sort of livestock. My brother's doing background in cattle in northeast Oklahoma, and the big thing you can protect against. It's all about health. Well, okay, yeah, he's background in cattle. It's the same thing on a sow farm. You can go great until you break the purse, and then it's. Mm-hmm. It's that same component that's different, but the same experience. And you can go, I hear you. I've never dealt with it, but I can hear you. Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah, Ford Motor Company doesn't have to deal with PRRS or E. coli outbreaks.
I think I'd rather have those than union negotiations, though. I think that'd be a pretty tough one to deal with.
Yeah.
Because that could be a big deal, big stopper.
Big. So what is your favorite ag-related tool, product, or innovation?
Geez, the simple and probably generic answer is food, right? Like just all the food I love in terms of a product. I think I don't think we're there yet in some of the coolness of some of the AI products, like the machine learning, visual interpretation. Some of those things are exciting to me. We're not there yet, but some would say we are in certain places, but I think there's just opportunities to continue to do some things that are exciting there. But as far as current, I don't know that I have anything other than the generic, like just food. Like I love to eat.
Love to eat.
I love to eat a lot of things.
You can tell by the fullness of our faces that we enjoy eating.
Yes.
The last question is, what is one small change that could make a big impact in agriculture's future?
I think, and it's a challenge everywhere. So it's not just agriculture, but I think we're a little more dependent on humans than some others. But they're just an ability to continue to connect people to the value of their work, but not just people. The aspect of people viewing the value, because it's, again, like back to my 8-year-old, we're going through aspects where I feel like 8-year-olds is where they start learning self-awareness and self-consciousness, and as a result they start making fun of others, because really making fun of others is all about like our own insecurities. And that starts to seem to be the age. Like, you don't feel like kindergartners are like, sure, they may say mean things, but they're not picking on kids, I think, as much as that 7, 8, 9-year-old age. So we run into that more. But I think that's an aspect too of, there's a component in Bagger Vance. Have you seen the movie? So the aspect where the kid is embarrassed of his dad sweeping the street during the Great Depression. Well, at least he's putting food on the table, right? His dad was a banker or something, some good job in doing that, but he's working to put food on the table. And I think that's the aspect of agriculture jobs and some of the things of, like, it's putting food on the table for a family and respecting, regardless of what people do, they're doing their best in that area. And I think that just, as a whole, appreciating the fact that people, regardless of what they do, are working to support their family. And that aspect puts them ahead of a lot of other people. And the lack of judgment of, like, okay, do they need to be this job or that job? I don't care. I don't care what they do. I'm not more impressed or less impressed by how much money they have or what they do. I'm impressed by the work ethic, the quality of person they are. And so if we could build that, I think it brings back some of the, aura is not the right word, but I'm going to use aura of agriculture, where it's gone more of, a lot of the people are hourly employees that let's be face it, don't make a ton of money. And it almost may be looked down upon versus being admired, because it is, that socioeconomic component of that. Probably a little foo-foo in that perspective, but that's just something I think that could really, I don't want to say make it honorable again, but make it like people are proud, and not the owners and people like yourself and mine, but I mean, we're a smaller proportion of the group that makes a living off of agriculture. And I think then you attract more talent, and you attract more people in when it becomes something that people are proud to do.
And as you're talking about that, there's one industry that's been hit really hard with that, the dairy industry. We talk about ice raids, and you can all probably also talk about the beef packing, but dairy industry. Those people that are milking those cows, that are walking the freestall barn, if they wouldn't do it, we wouldn't have milk. We need to appreciate everybody in the system. And I like the way that you talked about everybody in that system, and it has value and is important to getting food on the table.
And they're all humans. They all deserve respect.
Yes.
Until they
and that's not a touchy-feely.
No.
It's for us to be successful in our jobs, we have to value everybody that helps us do our jobs. Yeah. Wow. Well, I didn't think we were going to get a little philosophical there at the end. Well, Justin, I didn't realize that you and I had so many similarities, that I'm a nutritionist and you're a geneticist, but we both didn't grow up directly on a farm. We followed kind of a diversified path to get where we are. And while we're experts in our field, I think we're more generalists, that we see more inside our industry than a lot of people do. And I appreciate that about our experiences and what that puts us as value for the swine industry.
For sure. It's obviously by no means, it's a little part over here in a much bigger picture. I enjoy the opportunity to contribute, with the realization that it's a small part in a much bigger entity, but I enjoy it, and I'm hopefully bring value here or there to certain people I interact with, and I look forward to hopefully another 20 years of a career, something like that.
Well, thanks for sharing your story. And to my listeners and followers, there's another discussion that led to us understanding how the ag roots that Justin had affected him, put him in a position where he can be successful in the swine industry. I appreciate all the likes, the follows, and if you're on Apple and you've been listening, hit that subscribe button. Really sounds crazy for me to say it, but it does help with the way that this podcast gets shared. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Justin.
Thank you.